Welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain, and we look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are moving on from the 19th century to the very beginning of the 20th. I thought it might be fun to continue to look at the Ladies' Home Journal. I'm actually really enjoying the articles in there. But this time I want to move on to January of 1901. And this article is called "The Baltimore Belle Who Made the Most Brilliant Match of Any Girl in America," being the fourth part of a story of beautiful women. By William Perrine. Can you define what it means to make a good match? To have a good, marriage? So you're saying that they had the best marriage, or that she just married up the most? That's what I think they're saying. I just thought it would be fun to take a look and see what they thought at the time would make a quote-unquote good match, most brilliant match of any girl in America. The Romance of Pretty Betty Jumel. Jumel is actually French. It means twin. It means female twin. So I just find that interesting. I don't know if anybody in her family was a twin, but you never know. About the time when the Caton girls were first attracting attention in Paris, there was another American beauty who was regarded as a striking example of the independent spirit of her countrywomen, and who, too, dreamed of European distinction. Indeed, there was no French woman of fashion in the gay capital who, for a time, lived more lavishly than the handsome and imperious Betty Jumel. The origin of the youthful career of this singular woman have been the subjects of not a little speculation in the early romance of American history. It is believed that she was born at sea, somewhere between France and the West Indies, and that her mother, whose name was Capet, died at her birth. That her daughter was adopted by a Mrs. Thompson of Newport, Rhode Island. That at 17 years of age she contracted a runaway marriage with Colonel Peter Croix, an officer of the British Army, and that she thereupon removed with him to New York. It is known that her beauty was the object of much admiration, that she attracted public attention, and that her adventuresome disposition and her enchanting caprices were often themes of popular traditions and long lingered in the life of the old New Yorkers. It was as the wife of the opulent French merchant Stephen Jumel that Madame Betty became a famous figure in the public eye. The Jumel Mansion on Washington Heights is still one of the most notable historic houses on Manhattan Island that have survived the century. It was originally the wedding gift of the beautiful Mary Phillips, on whom George Washington pressed his youthful suit, but who chose to marry a lover who afterwards became a Tory colonel. Really? Is that why he married his cousin? Yeah, anyways. That's there's so much drama. There's so much drama in history. If you look back and it's like, oh yeah, they were actually second cousins, and then they were dating, and then they split up, and then this other person married this other person, and then the original guy didn't have anybody marry, so he married his first cousin. It was like, wait, what did you just say? And that's history. That's like how real people lived. There's just so much drama. It's like you could write a soap opera just based on history. You're just reading this. The fact that Napoleon Bonaparte's brother Jerome married a woman whose sister married his, the guy who beat Napoleon. That's very dramatic. That would definitely be that's TV worthy. It's TV worthy. So funny. How she would entertain royalty. The New Year's Eve feasts which Betty gave in this house when she became its mistress, the carnival of flowers, at which the guests would sometimes pelt one another with nosegays. Okay. A nosegay is like a corsage. It's like a little, group of flowers. That's just so weird. The plate, the scores of pictures, and the mysteries of secret passageways all gave birth to many a legend about its revelries. See, Betty Jumel. Let's make a movie about her. I bet it would be hilarious. Recent visitors saw there a stand which was said to have belonged to Voltaire, a large black leather trunk which was supposed to have been used by Napoleon on his march to Moscow, and an elaborate embroidery of flowers surrounded by a golden chain on a white ground, which had been made by the Empress Josephine. On the furniture was emblazoned the symbolic N of the empire in commemorations of its great ruler. There it was on one occasion that Joseph Bonaparte was received with all the honor that it was possible for Madame Jumel to pay royalty. One of the traditional tales of the house is that when Joseph came thither to dine, he and the hostess passed out of the dining room. Okay, sorry, totally misread that. I was like, they passed out? No, they passed out of the dining room, arm in arm, to enter the banquet room. Okay. The entrance from the hall was through a narrow door. When they came to it, the distinguished guest, with a princely bow, motioned to her to lead the way, but the madame was unwilling to take precedence of her royal friend. She signified her wish that he should precede her, and there they stood like Mrs. Malaprop and the gallant Beverley in the play, in their contest of scrupulous politeness, lest one might be seated before the other. See, I told you this would make a great movie. Now, I'm not familiar with Malaprop and Beverly, however, I can picture it. It'd be like, no, you first, no, you first, no, you first. Making their obeisances and bowing both time and again as to which should surrender the right of precedence. It was never recorded who did surrender it, but Madame quickly made up her mind that such a situation should not happen a second time. The next day, another door was cut into the apartment, through which thereafter she might enter simultaneously with any prince or potentate who might be her guest of honor. Oh my gosh. She had another door put in, specifically so that they didn't have to decide who went first. Oh, that's so funny. The dashing beauty runs through a fortune. Yeah, sounds normal to me. Elegant in person, commanding in her deportment, and ambitious to play the part of a cultured woman of the world, Betty Jumel was enabled, through the fortune of her husband, to live in a splendor which brought upon her the criticism of less unconventional persons, but to which she was supremely and contemptuously indifferent. I don't care what you think of me. I like that. When her husband took her to Paris about the time of the downfall of Napoleon, they set up a magnificent establishment in which she enjoyed the social patronage of Lafayette, and in which she became a noted figure as she had been in New York. A portrait of her, which was painted in the French capital, represented her in a rich gown of sapphire velvet. Her deep blue eyes, her chestnut hair, her full red lips, the expression of an independent and audacious nature in the features, and the pose of the buxom figure seated in a carved chair were all characteristic of a worldly dame of the robust style of beauty. Her life of gay prodigality made such inroads upon Jumel's fortune that he felt unable to start upon the task of trying to accumulate another. The spirited wife returned to America with a bold determination to restore it all at all hazards. In a few years, she had managed the broken estates so well, and with such business-like energy, that when he came back to New York, he found that they were again free to live in something like their former luxury. Wow, good for her. Gee, that shows a financial talent. I was not expecting that. It turns out he was the one who ran through his own fortune, and she was able to build it back up, so she must be very good at investments. Because I don't know how else she would have made money. That's very impressive. She lived happily with the old merchant until his death, which occurred when he was 70 years of age. Then soon followed an event which for a while filled New York and indeed the country with astonishment, even accustomed as the city had been to her caprices. Interesting. Her marriage to the venerable Aaron Burr. Really? From the time when Madame Jumel had been a young girl, and when Aaron Burr was only a captain in the American army, she had been more than once under the spell of his strange fascination. He had introduced her to the celebrated Margaret Moncrief, and had desperately flirted with her, and had implanted within her an admiration which was still alive when he was in social exile. She had written of him in earlier days that he appeared to her to be the perfection of manhood, that his figure and form had been fashioned in the mold of the Graces, and that he was as familiar with the drawing-room as with the camp. In a word, she said, he was a combined model of Mars and Apollo. His eyes was of the deepest black, and sparkled with an incomprehensible brilliancy when he smiled. But if enraged, his power was absolutely terrific. into whatever female society he chanced by the fortunes of war or the vicissitudes of private life. To be cast, he conquered all hearts without an effort, and until he became deeply involved in the affairs of state, and the vexatious incident to the political arena, I do not believe a female capable of the gentle emotions of love ever looked upon him without loving him. Really? Wow. Wherever he went, he was petted and caressed by her sex, and hundreds vied with each other in a continuous struggle to offer him some testimonial of their adulation. Some time subsequent to the death of Jumel, the widow, who was then about 58 years old, and still an attractive woman, called upon Aaron Burr in his law office in quest of an opinion concerning her business affairs. After a long career of ostracism and ups and downs, Burr was earning a precarious livelihood at the age of 78. Wow. Okay. Even then, he had not altogether lost his power of interesting men and women in his conversation and manners. The madame was again delighted with him. She caused one of her relatives, a young man, to enter his office as a law student, and after she came back from her summer visit at Saratoga, where she was long a famous figure, she invited the vivacious old lawyer to dinner. Poor and homeless, Burr quickly took advantage of the renewed impression he had made upon the opulent widow. With all the gallantry of his youth, he tenderly led her to the dining room, and gracefully remarked, "I give you my hand, madame. My heart has long been yours." Concluded on page 34. Let's find out. All right, here we go. Continued from page 6. Then the colonel's calls to the mansion became numerous, and he made up his mind to marry her. She at first declined his suit, or hesitated over it, and in his resolute but easy way he assured her that he would not take no for an answer. In a few days, the madame was surprised to find him at the door of her house with a clergyman, who was as old as himself, and who had in fact married him half a century before to Theodosia Prevost. Lovely. A singular scene followed. The widow still protested that she did not want to be married, and she declared that she did not wish to part with her freedom. But she was lonely in her mansion. She needed the help, too, of a steward or trained man of affairs. Some of the persons in her household thought that gossip could be avoided by yielding to the venerable suitor, and after much parleying, she consented to be gowned for the ceremony of marriage. Jeez. In a pearl-tinted satin dress so heavy with stiffness that it would stand alone, the bride stood with Burr before the great fireplace in the tea-room as the clergyman pronounced them man and wife in the presence of the members of the family and the servants. What the heck? So she's dating this guy, sort of. Like, not really, but kind of. And he's like, "I really want to marry you." And she's like, "Actually, I really don't want to marry anybody. Like, I'm happy being single." And he's like, "No, I won't take no for an answer." Shows up to her house with a priest. And is like, "See, we can get married right now." And she's like, "Excuse me? I just said I don't want to get married." And eventually gets talked into it. And wears a super, elaborate gown. Like, where did they get it? Where the heck did that come from? Did she already have it? Or was it you couldn't have had it made that quickly? I don't know. That seems so weird. Ugh, I don't like that part of it at all. Separated from her erratic husband. Thank you. Get out of there, Betty. Okay, but the new Mrs. Burr soon began to repent her surrender. Yeah, she didn't want it in the first place. Her husband, she discovered, was no longer a shrewd advisor in business. He was investing her money to her disadvantage. He was declining to account for it, and he was concerning himself in speculations which she knew to be foolish or wasteful. They just said she was the one that was good with money. Yeah? Not him. Ugh. The wife was too bold and energetic a woman to be ruled long by Burr, even as he was in his best days, and she gave him to understand that he must not expect to exercise any further control over her affairs. Good for her. It was said, too, that she had been so exasperated as to box his ears and turn him out of doors on beholding him kiss one of her maids-in-waiting. Oh, my gosh! Ah! Oh, my gosh. Okay, however this may have been, proceedings were begun to take away from him all authority over her property, and while no divorce was procured from Burr, the couple did not again see each other during the last 2 years of his life. Good. Oh my gosh, Betty, I'm so sorry you gave in. Oh, I'm so sorry. In her old age, Madame Jumel's mind became haunted with fears that she might become the victim of desperate conspirators with designs of murder. In her weird fancy, she saw all kinds of plots going on to despoil her of her property, to kidnap, or to poison her. Okay, I don't really blame her for fearing that after what she just went through with Aaron Burr. I didn't know he was... I knew Aaron Burr was a little slimy, but dude, I didn't know he was that bad. Like, that's pretty bad. Narcissist. Ugh. Oh my gosh. I need to watch Hamilton again. Because you can tell he's slimy in that movie alone. Okay, so she got a little paranoid in her old age, yeah? At one time, she actually employed a band of 20 persons whom she dressed up in all sorts of fantastic regimentals, whose duty it was to act as a bodyguard or as a garrison to her rural house, and whom she placed under the marshalship of a young grandson. During each night, there were 3 regular guards or watches, each relieving the other. Occasionally, an alarm would be sounded or a gun fired off, to the consternation of the poor old madame, and then the entire battalion was put under arms, and the surrounding country searched for the enemy. Well, I don't really blame her for doing that. I mean, if you were feeling that paranoid at the end of your life, like I would hire guards too. The singular ending of her life. Her eccentricities had then become so marked as to indicate that her once vigorous mind was falling into a complete and irreparable decline. Yeah, it kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? Like, why else would she develop paranoia? She continued to visit Saratoga even when she was nearly 90 years of age. It was then that she began, after something like a paralytic stroke, to suffer such delusions as left no room for doubt that she had become irresponsible. Yeah, well, she needs help, you know. She thought that the grounds around her house were filled with hidden treasure. She declared that she had power to perform miraculous cures of the sick by laying on them her hands, and she would compel her grandson, when she suspected him of harboring a purpose of poisoning, to drink first her tea, which was set before her. She would then turn out of doors the relatives whom she imagined to be in conspiracy to destroy her life, and after the delusion had passed away, would gladly welcome them back again. When the madame came to make her will, it was clear that she did not possess what lawyers term a sound and disposing mind. She was popularly reputed to be worth millions when she died in 1865, and her estate, which was actually worth perhaps not much less than $1 million, gave rise to a will contest that has become historic in the annals of litigation. She had survived all of her contemporaries in the days of her beauty, and men who looked upon her for more than a generation could only wonder over the youthful charms which had once caught the admiring gaze of Knox and Lafayette and Jefferson and even Washington. All right, then there's a little note that says the 5th article of the series will be printed in the February issue of the journal, Mr. Perrine telling the tender story of the beautiful daughter of Aaron Burr. One of the most touching pictures in American history of a daughter's devotion to her father is that of Theodosia Burr. She was the most beautiful girl in her time in America. Though all the adversities of Aaron Burr's career, her devotion remained staunch, and her last act being to embark on a journey to join him, a journey which never ended, and which remains today one of the mysteries of the century. Wow. Okay, that was so much more than I was expecting. I thought the story of Betty Jumel was hilarious, and I think that her story as a person would totally make an amazing movie. So whoever hasn't gotten on this, let's do this. Make a story about Betty Jumel, because I would totally watch it. I am going to Google it really quickly just to see how accurate they were, yeah? Because a name like Betty Jumel cannot possibly be that common. Here they're calling her Eliza Jumel, but Eliza was another short version of Elizabeth as well as Betty. So I think that that's her. Now a ghost at Washington Heights. She had a pretty house. It's a little White House-ish, yeah, but it obviously much smaller. But oh, there's a painting of her. Portrait of Eliza Jumel. See, here she goes by Eliza. And then they said her name was Betty. She had really nice clothes. Her house was very nicely furnished. It's a little bit like Victorian style, but it's very, very pretty. It reminds me a little bit of the movies of Pride and Prejudice, like the way they have it set up. Anyway, I'm going to see if I can get some of these pictures. Save image as, yeah, so I can show them to you. I would love to show them to you. And I'm going to try and get some photos of the actual people as well. I think that that's the kind of the least I can do. I don't know if there are photos of either of them or both of them, but I'm really hoping that there are. There we go. Eliza Jumel, née Bowen, also known as Eliza Burr, was a wealthy American socialite. She was married to Aaron Burr, and their divorce was finalized on the day of his death. See? And in the article they said that they didn't get divorced. So, Elizabeth Bowen, she was born April 2nd, and she would later joke that she had come near being an April Fool. I mean, she sounds funny. Yeah? Like, marriage to Stephen Jumel. But didn't she marry somebody else earlier? Didn't they say that she ran away from home at 17 and married somebody? Yeah? Her mother remarried. Holy cow, both Phoebe Bowen and the widow Ingram were arrested in 1785 for keeping a disorderly house. Jeez. And Eliza and her sister were both again thrown in the workhouse, where they were indentured to from there she was indentured to a sea captain and his family. That does not sound fun. Keeping a disorderly house. So are we talking like hoarding, or are we talking like prostitution? I'm not sure what they were going for there. So yeah, time in Paris. It sounds like most of it's legit, except for the fact that she actually did divorce Aaron Burr. It just happened to be the day that he died. So I'm not sure which one went into effect first. The divorce or her being a widow. Her husband was kidnapped in 1841. Oh my gosh. Okay. Hang on. Okay, let me read it all the way through. Later life. Eliza Jumel continued to travel throughout Europe and to the summer retreats of New York for 20 years. Anne Northup, a noted chef and wife of the kidnapped enslaved black musician Solomon Northup, lived and worked in Eliza's mansion for 2 years with her daughter Elizabeth and son Alonzo. Her husband was kidnapped in 1841. In her last significant travels, Eliza accompanied the two adopted grandchildren on a grand tour of Europe in 1856, during which time a large life-sized oil portrait of the three was executed by Alcide Ercole. As symptoms of dementia took their toll on Eliza's memory and behavior, stories about her eccentricities spread through New York and Saratoga Springs. Apocryphal stories from the 1880s suggest that Eliza may have become a regular target of mockery in Saratoga Springs. Eliza remained at her Manhattan mansion for the last 6 years of her life, dying there at age 90 in 1865. She was buried in Manhattan in the Trinity Church Cemetery Mausoleum. But, her paranoia was definitely stemmed from, people she knew. Like Anne Northup, who lived at her mansion, her husband had been kidnapped. So, Eliza thinking that she would be kidnapped is absolutely not that far-fetched. She knew someone who had been kidnapped. So, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean nobody's out to get you. Anyway, I'm just saying, don't dismiss her concerns just because, you don't think that they were real. Here's a smaller, an earlier picture. I think Betty Jumel was much more fortunate, just as far as fortune goes, having grown up really poor. And then she kind of made her own fortune, and she was very intelligent. And if she weren't, then she wouldn't have been able to invest the way she did. She was very good with money. Anyways, that's my big rant for the day. And the one about Betty Jumel being forced to marry Aaron Burr was awful. Boundaries, people. No is a complete sentence. She said she didn't want to marry you, and you didn't take no for an answer. That is absolutely despicable. No one should do that to another person. So, ever. Anyway, that's my rant of the day, and I hope you enjoyed the Microfiche time capsule. I found that really fascinating, and I learned about a whole group of, people that I knew nothing about before. So I learned something today. I hope you did too. If you liked this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.